Well, I think the first thing that we've got to do is we have got to try to get at least people to move beyond the preoccupation with the self. We have got to try to bring about as broadly as we possibly can what I would call a conversion to the environment. It's akin to a religious conversion. I'm not trying to convert you to Christianity or to Buddhism or to let alone to Anglicans or Catholics. All I'm trying to do is to say that a person who becomes deeply convinced about something moves through a process. They see themselves in some perspective. It's what Christ calls in the gospel repentance. Repentance is simply seeing yourself in perspective. And we humans have got to recover our perspective. Modern human beings are divorced from the environment. To realise I was still in the world, I actually had to go out of this God-forsaken hall and look outside to see a blue sky. Actually, all I saw was my car parked across the road and immediately felt guilty. Because I was too bloody lazy to walk here this morning. So there's that real sense that we have got to see ourselves in perspective, and then from that we move to a sense of connection with, a sense of commitment to a reality, and that reality is the world around us. We have no existence as human beings outside this context. I remember once a young man saying to me, oh look, it doesn't matter what we do to the environment because we can all move to another planet. Well, I mean, and this man was a historian by training, and I thought, honestly, only someone who's never, kind of lived in the real world could possibly say something like that. This is the only home we've got. So we've got to bring people then to a kind of almost, if you like, a conversion, and to break that preoccupation with the self, to help people attain a sense of awe and wonder at the world around them, to let them experience the otherness of the natural world, its sheer indifference to us, to get them actually bushwalking or surfing, to get them taking risks. This morning, Peter's talk about children. I mean, children are so cosseted; they never ever take a risk. We've got to kind of recover something of that. We've also got to recover something of the sheer fragility of our human condition. I always love it, actually, when there's a bit of turbulence in the plane, because I love looking at the other passengers. And you see some guys who really take themselves pretty seriously quaking in their boots and a little bit of sweat starting to appear. I always enjoy that, I must say. As you can see, I'm a perverse masochist kind of person. Mind you, when it gets worse, I start to sweat. I remember once coming on a flight in a very shaky little aircraft from Suva to Nandi, going over the mountains. I was sweating. The Chinese man sitting next to me, his way of dealing with his nervousness was talking, but his talking made me more tense, and so it was twice compounded. But I mean, we've got to get people back in touch with the environment. We've got to get people beyond their fixations with security, with wealth, with consumption, and with the tin pot little worlds that they live in. In other words, exactly again, and here you hear the Catholics and the Anglicans just repeating the same old thing, mirroring each other. We've got to move beyond and question and confront the capitalist neoliberal ideology, which is, as Will Stephan said yesterday, driving the whole process that we're involved in. Now, you might say, well, that was a great little sermon, and normally at the end of the sermon, Catholics bless themselves and sit down and then we take up the collection. So we've got the collectors lined up here, Russell. Yeah, the Anglicans, yes, they've always won ahead. Normally that's how we'd finish this little fervorino that you've just listened to. But the problem is, of course, nothing's going to change very much. That's the simple reality. Nothing much is going to change, and the same people with a few new faces are going to be at the next SPA conference going through the same rigmarole. And probably it'll be on in Lent again. So I have just two very brief things to say about that. The first thing I want to say is that yes, we won't make many converts to the environment, but change in society, and this is the historian speaking, change in society, at least in my view, comes from small groups of people who have grasped a vision, who have seen another way of operating, who have understood what is actually happening within their culture and are prepared to take action to do something about it. And people, those of us who are here, have grasped another vision. We are able and prepared to do something about it. That's the hopeful side. Sadly, there is a negative side, and that is that the time frame we have to work in is so short, very, very short, possibly even already past. I'm not in a position to make that judgment. But however, given the fact that things might be crook in Tallarook, as we used to say in the old days in Melbourne, and that we may be in for a pretty dire world coming, my next book is a study of the Dark Ages.
Thank you very much, Paul Collins. We've obviously got a question. Straight up, please.
Good afternoon, Guy Vickerman. Thank heavens you two blokes have retired. I suggest that were you still in cloth, you may not have been allowed to speak outside your square. As you
I can't understand. I can't catch what you're saying.
I'm sorry. I say thank goodness you two fellas have retired, because if you'd have still been within your square, you may not have been able to say what you have this afternoon. You mentioned before about people being very concerned with self. Do you think this is a transition from the religious squares that we all used to be forced into, and that now that maybe secularism is growing up with education, and this is part of the growing pain that people have to go through to become themselves before they can step on to the holistic view of being concerned with everybody else there is in the world, including the animals?
Well, I'm not quite so optimistic as you might be about increasing secularism. I mean, I think we're probably, I think that, nominal people who kind of in previous generations hung on to religion simply as a kind of a pointer of identity within society have enough sense to give that up. And there's no doubt that that secularism is a very dominant way of looking at reality in our society. But I wouldn't underestimate the influence of certainly the Christian communities and the Christian churches in our society. Have a read of the new book, it's fairly considerable. The Catholic Church, for instance, is the second largest employer in Australia after the federal government. Did I hear a gasp there? So, I mean, we kind of need to keep some of those things in perspective. Look, I think, yes, there is a breakdown in the old meaning structures that, to some extent, Christianity provided for our society, and I think we may well be in a transitional stage with people, exactly as you say, with people, kind of the engrossed with the self, sorting through all of these issues, etc., etc., etc. Except that, of course, that so much of this is the product of affluence. When you're struggling to survive, you don't have time for 10 years of Freudian counselling or Jungian counselling or any other type of counselling. You actually get on with life. Now, I'm not recommending that we all revert to living in poverty, but I am saying that I think a lot of this is the product of people who've got far too much time, far too much money, and not enough brains.